which stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. I will say, I can tell you, Linda, you were a teacher because you know that by heart. You say that with enthusiasm.
Yeah. Too loud. Thank you, Mayor.
All right, we are having a special meeting regarding our comp plan update. So we're going to be looking at the 2040 land use plan, introduction and community perspectives, and review of policies. We can get to that tonight. Can I have a motion to approve tonight's agenda?
So moved.
I have a second.
A second.
All right, it's a tie.
Joel can have it.
Now he goes to the runner.
We have a motion and a second. Any, other than to say we've had item number 1, so just to note for your motion here that item number 1 has been completed. We're on to item number 2 for this meeting. So that understood. All those in favor of the motion? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. So I don't know, we have just one copy of this in the back there?
I got one copy of it was.
Mr. McCray has a copy.
All right.
I can share with our other guests.
No, that's fine.
Are you good? Okay.
She's just here to check on Linda.
Yeah, she's doing her peer review.
I'm just here to check on it.
You want a copy?
All right. We have our packets.
Yeah, go ahead, take one.
And so let me, has everybody been able to read the handouts they received this week?
Yep.
So Linda, do you want to give us a brief summary of what you read?
And give me a few minutes. I'm just digesting my pizza.
All right, so everybody has the original 2030 plan that we issued back 10 years ago in 2009. We've also been given, everybody was given this draft comprehensive plan recently.
Yeah.
So by now you should know it by heart. So you'll know if there's any discrepancies here. And for the people that are watching this online, what we'll be going through here tonight is basically the 2030 plan with some highlighted changes. So what you were handed this last week, anything that's in the different color would be the changes from the 2030 plan. So as you look through it and you say, gosh, I didn't know those existed before. You look back and if it's in black text, that's been part of the 2030 plan this whole time.
Oh.
Okay? So we are not changing that. And that's what we were saying before. The previous meetings we've had, we're not looking to change things extensively. What has changed is the land use primarily here on Old Viking, or on Viking, and out on 47. But other than that, the majority of this, cleaning up some language, cleaning up some typos, and adding text where necessary. So the thing we'll primarily want to be focusing on tonight are the things in the different color text. Now, that being said, if you have comments on things that are in here, and I've gone through my plan and highlighted a number of things here, so I just want to make sure that if we wanted those to stay, that they're staying. If we want them to change, this is the time to do it. But it's also something we want to make sure that we accentuate with all of our commissions and committees going forward, that this is the guiding document by which we make our ordinances and zoning and policy decisions. So this thing really was well put together originally, I think. That being said, Liz, do you want to say anything as way of introduction?
Just basically what you said, I've highlighted in my PowerPoint presentation, mainly just the changes and we'll talk about those. You can make some decisions one way or the other. Any tweaks to what you see in black or blue, and so I have up first the proposed land use plan as we last approved it. And if you want to jump right into that, or if you'd rather start out with community perspectives, talk about how the overall intent has not changed, our desire to stay rural, and how the Met Council withdrew now then from their long-term service area of the regional wastewater system. We no longer have that MUSA, that urban service area along our eastern border. So we are not any more limited to that 1 per 10 density, which was kind of a holding area for development. As you know, we since have a settlement area with a proposed different density. We'll get more, talk about that more later. I guess the important thing that came out of my meeting with Met Council, they did have some nice compliments on our, not only our 2030 plan, but our draft 2040 plan, saying that we have gone above and beyond what we need to if we're a city our size. They were very happy to see the quality in mapping and that kind of thing. The important thing is, even though we have been removed from that diversified rural and that MUSA area, they will still be looking for us to use some of their, what they call flexible development guidelines. And that just means looking for alternative ways possibly to, you know, be a steward of the land, preserve our natural resources, you know, preserve open space and those kinds of things. So, I guess it's just, it's good long-term planning to think of ways to improve yourself while you stay rural. And so that's one of our goals when we develop some of the parameters for this new settlement area. So with that, what direction would you like to take, Mr. Mayor?
Well, I think that, again, the changes are not extensive. So I think if we want to, one option I considered for tonight was to go through those changes and see if anybody had any comments on the things that were added or highlighted.
In the policies?
Yep.
Okay. We could certainly do that, go page by page with some of the written material.
Sure, I'm all on the right page here, so.
So yeah, the introduction with the highlighted yellow, that's the first page of the,
Considered page 1.
right. And the yellow is indicating documents yet to be completed. The Park and Recreation Committee's updating our park plan, and we're waiting on the Upper Rum River Watershed Management Organization to adopt their plan before we can update our water management plan.
So Liz, on the Park and Trail Systems plan, right now with the way we're functioning in the Park and Trail Committee, we had authorized, I think, did we do it officially as a council? Authorized the chair to work with you at this point to make sure that was done in a timely fashion
Oh, okay,
to
good.
get that done up. So,
And Judy has a Word version of the document, and she said that, yeah, she would make some changes and update, and then we could get together and review those based on what the committee was looking at. But she did mention it was mostly, you know, updating our either names or just information, not as many, you know, not policy changes, so to speak, but I believe about a year ago, there was like 5 areas that we altered. We came up with a revised plan, park and trail plan. Yeah. So
The
good,
only,
yeah.
the only other part of that would be from a land use standpoint, we talked about potentially parkland being part of the commercial residential area over here.
Right,
So we'll want to make sure that if appropriate or where appropriate, we include that. That's some pretty good concept plans on a park there, so.
yeah, that's a good point.
All right, and then other than that, on that first page, there's just some date changes, updates on the bottom there. The comprehensive plans in 93, 99, and 2009, and now 2019. Anything else there?
Nope, not on page 1.
Page 2 is just the, Met Council meeting and then your comments. Have we been responding to other jurisdictions' plans that have come through, Ellen, do you know?
I have not personally. I've been
She's
forwarding them to you.
forwarded them to me.
And then you send a letter similar to what we've been getting?
Right, if I don't have comments, I think I responded on a couple and then just didn't respond on a couple.
If you say anything that might, when you're doing that, if somebody, there was a question when we were doing the roads, one of the residents was living on the west edge of the city, said, are we seeing what's going on in Elk River? Do we know what their plans are for our western border? And so I think, if you're seeing something there where a neighboring community is, or jurisdiction around us is looking at something, you could at least, of significance,
Right, exactly.
bring it to the council's attention, saying, by the way, you need to know, St. Francis is tripling their sewer and water, and will be wanting to
Right.
come down here with it, so.
That's exactly what I look for, is anything, big changes in roads or land use, or if they change the designation next to our border, that kind of thing.
Yeah, because I'd like to know where Elk River's thinking they're coming with roads and all that new development. Any roads that might be coming east, what should we be looking at aligning with, so.
Okay.
Go over here, Councilmember Bryan?
Would it hurt if those at least got sent out to council and then we can decide if we want to see them or not, or if just something jumps out at us, we can work with Liz?
Are they
Just
getting you
email.
summaries, or are they,
No, they're usually reduced size PDFs.
so probably PDFs?
As long as it's, I would say electronic, I certainly do not want paper copies, because I know.
No, everybody else gets electronic, but you.
Okay.
You have to read through it.
Yeah.
No, if we could get
One-sided.
PDFs of those.
Okay. I can look back, I don't even recall which ones I've seen.
I know there was, Ellen mentioned that something about St. Francis's, but we missed the deadline or something.
I found it on top of the file cabinet in
Yeah.
Corey's
So
office.
that's all I've seen.
Yeah, we're way past the deadline.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I haven't gotten any for a while, so we may be.
But have you
past it.
noticed in the comments, I think from the county, a number of people, maybe it was your comments, but a number of people missed their deadlines.
Yes, yes, and the Met Council told me that.
So,
Mr. Mayor,
Councilmember Bryan?
the other question, are we literally going to be bumping heads with the watershed on who's done first?
Well,
Is
we
it,
can't,
how big of a different, how big is it going to be?
it's not gonna hold up the approval, to my knowledge. We're gonna just operate under our current plan until we get the new one.
Right, I mean, the worst case, I mean, we're not making we're not making major changes, especially how Nowthen is affected
Right.
in the comp plan. Where if it's holding it, I'm just going on the record, if we're messing with anything, if we, we always, as I understand, if we have to, we can make an amendment.
If we miss our deadline because of the watershed, I'm gonna personally hold the watershed representative responsible.
Yikes.
No, as Liz said, we'll continue to operate
Yeah, okay.
under the existing,
Yeah.
it won't hold the plan up.
Okay.
And if it comes in and there's any significant change, we can make that amendment.
And you always
We really
have-
have till the end of the year to do that, don't we?
I was gonna say, yeah, once you submit to Met Council, then they have, I think it's 10 days or 2 weeks to let you know what's missing. And then you have that response time.
I know it went to the second review, if I remember the schedule.
We'd rather have it right than rushed.
Yeah, right, I was just saying, the watershed went to this, is moving on, because it's in
Oh,
the
it's
second
moved
review.
ahead,
Yes,
oh, okay,
so.
I see, good. Okay. Good. And I did specifically ask the Met Council if we had to include these maps, their answer was yes. Even though they don't apply, but we, I added that historic description in here, and they were good with that.
Yeah, that metro area map's kind of hard to read, but
I know it, and I actually went to their website and uploaded their version, so that's as good as it gets. But it is available right on there.
I do have a question. I've been, received a call from the Minneapolis paper, and they do want to know how many people in now that don't have plumbing.
That gal talked to me as well.
And I said, "Well, if they don't have indoor plumbing, they're not telling us about it."
Right, that's what I said, and I said, the only thing I can think of is if, the US Census is surveying people that are transient or whatever,
Oh,
what do you, how, I wouldn't even understand why or how they can say, I guess if you're living somewhere, I don't know how, I would really be curious to find out, how the census handles that.
Well, now remember, they're also trying to get a census on people living in town that aren't necessarily in homes. So
Right.
if I was
exactly.
living on the streets, I might answer that, no, I don't have hot running water or a flush toilet.
Exactly. Right.
But I'm looking at this map of the metro area, and there's a lot of places in green on the outskirts of this. If you've got historic cabins or things like that, we're talking 2,600 out of 3.5 million people.
Right, is a pretty small number,
But just so you know, that the Minneapolis paper has been calling everybody to ask who doesn't have indoor plumbing.
I think it's,
They said, if you find out anybody who does, please call and give us their name and address.
Mr. Mayor, I just want to say that my mother moved the plumbing indoors on the Greenberg farm about 30, 40 years ago. I think it was around in the 60s or 6 years or so. She waited till her husband went to Germany, and then she had a plumber put the plumbing in the house. But the old outhouse shell still is on the farm as a remembrance of the good old days. But for the record, we have indoor plumbing at the Greenberg farm.
hallelujah.
And it's a good thing, because the Sears catalogs no longer exist.
Yeah. Then you're in trouble.
All right, that being said, let's move on to, anything on page 2 or 3 that we need to know of, Liz?
no.
That map's a little easier to read. Which is why in the newsletter, we wanted to go with the larger map.
This one?
The full
No,
page-
that wasn't the right map.
The now then one, but we wanted the full page rather than that little quarter section.
So people can pick out their
I'm
lots.
having trouble getting to the newsletter these days.
It's all
A
right,
few other issues going on.
all right. First things first.
Thank you, Stephen Cummings.
All right, page 4. Just an update there, the couple of blanks. What are the blanks for?
That's just when we officially adopt it, the date we adopt it,
So you just gotta fill that
and
in.
then we'll fill that in just for the record there.
Just added Planning and Zoning Commission. Page 5, no changes. Page 6, no changes. Page 7, man, we went crazy on page. All right, so we've got an introductory community perspectives paragraph. Anybody have any questions on that paragraph?
I see in the second to the last line, I need to capitalize the P in plan, comprehensive plan.
All right, then on the bottom of the page, landfilling and excavation, very few aggregate resources. So we change little to few. Second sentence, we have excavated to mine black dirt and or to provide fill for development. Again, if you're following along at home, probably pretty boring, but we need to get through this. Any other questions on that page? And again, if you have anything that you've noted in the existing text, this would be a good time to bring that up as well. All right, page 8. Question there is, it's not addition, but the question is, the city may wish to consider a tree preservation and planting ordinance.
Definitely.
Trying to preserve the trees that are,
Yeah, one of the things that you'll find is that the development that went in just southwest of me, when they came in, it's easiest for builders not to have to mess with existing trees and then be responsible if they've damaged roots while they're building. So they literally just brought in bulldozers and took the forest and pushed it all into a big pile and burned it. Now I think they typically sell it for wood chips, because you can chip up to 24-inch trunks now. But the idea was it's just easier to start over. And now, 20 years later, and all those trees that people planted are starting to turn into a nice little neighborhood. But the point of this is we have very few existing
Forest.
natural, oak savannas or, we're trying to restore some of that. So the question is, how restrictive do we want to be on tree preservation and then planting ordinances? I remember when I first moved here, Burnsville was very restrictive. As to you basically planned your housing around the trees that existed on the lot. And they've maintained a very healthy, mature woodland because of that. What do we want to do? We didn't start out with the good woodlands to begin with.
Nope.
And, if we have a tree preservation, this is something we want to put as a project, then what would that look like? Not going to tell you you can't tear down a box elder, but if you've got mature hardwoods, what does the city want to do with that without being too restrictive on people's use of their own property? Councilmember Bryant.
I'm just
I
trying
don't
to.
have my glasses on. when I
I'm trying to
see that.
formulate how that's going, and we are in I would say a somewhat unique perspective where me being one perfect example, I didn't have that issue. Building on a wide open field, so
But when you built, there were some pretty good corn stalks. in
corn
that.
stalks, and every single one of them left by that fall. I even took them out ahead of time.
So the question, and again, we don't have to resolve it tonight, but do we want staff to investigate what exists out there? And there's two things. One is preservation of existing valuable trees. The other one is, if you were to build in a cornfield like you did, would we require
Yes.
to plant trees? Is that within our purview to do that, or would we make recommendations that here's trees that are healthy in this zone, we would recommend something like that? And I have a tough time going and telling somebody they have to plant trees.
But Mr. Mayor,
Councilmember
Thank
Blake.
there are a lot of cities that do make that's the demand. You build and there's a prerequisite, you have to have so many trees on that lot planted when you.
Is that something you're familiar with, Liz?
Oh, yeah, it's very common.
It's very common. And secondly, do we have anything for preserving? I mean, there's so many things that are happening with there's some worm coming out now that's killing so many of the, like our neighbor lost all of their pines. Do do we have anything in our city to help people that are experiencing things like that, where they're losing their trees, not to any fault of their own, and, or is that just something you have to deal, everybody has to deal with it themselves, it's not anything you ever?
I was gonna say, we have no arborist, working with us as a city. The county certainly does.
Yeah,
And the county has programs for the ash borer, and by the way, we just suffered through a horrible winter in some people's eyes, but it decimated the ash borer, that cold weather we had.
really?
So, part of that is, the county can tell you, here's how you keep from spreading it, here's what you can do if you've got it, here's how you get rid of it.
Okay.
Here's some, so the county does have good suggestions, and we certainly can include that as in our newsletter on the website. Here's where you get a hold of that county information. Here's some basic information on not transporting woods and blood.
That's a good
Whatever it
idea,
is.
actually.
But we don't have an arborist like some cities do. The question is, do we want to provide direction to those who do build out here about the city's policy on trees, either taking down what we have or putting up if you don't have it?
Mr. Mayor,
Almost got it out. Councilmember Greenberg.
when the storage facility gentleman was going through planning and zoning, did I hear them say, put some vegetation, put some bushes over here?
Yes,
Planning
and
and
that is required in commercial properties, that they have to have a buffer between residential areas. So there is a buffer that's trees, berms, a variety of things. And I really was surprised how many trees they took down in that process, considering that we very specifically like the idea that they're being hidden back there. They took down a lot of trees. But they do have to put up a certain amount as part of their construction plan. And we would have that in the commercial that would go along 22. We would have a berm of some sort, some type of tree plan between the commercial properties and the residentials to the south. So that already is part of our policy. We've just never done it for residential properties. So if you come in and want to denude your lot of trees and then build a house, right now that's what we do.
Mr. Mayor,
Councilmember Rainville.
so that we can stay on task, could we direct staff to, as we go through this, start a list of things that we need to look at a future date? We just spent a lot of time on that, whether we want a tree preservation and planning ordinance. We start a list that we can look at later, and we don't have to go into detail
Absolutely.
with them now, because we have a lot to go through here.
Okay.
Right.
Councilmember Bryan, did you still have anything?
It's not critical to the comp plan that the ordinance be written one way or another, right?
Exactly, ordinance comes later, so,
Okay.
yeah, it's
I
good to
would say
focus
it's-
right now.
As far as a comp plan perspective, it would be encouraged to preserve existing trees on a development.
A good way to say it is significant trees and hardwoods.
Yeah, however you phrase it.
Right.
As one who mows the lawn, I'm glad I didn't have to put any trees back.
Okay, so noted.
Third paragraph, groundwater contamination, just changed to a capital C. Second to the last paragraph, under the land use. Residential development within the context of preserving rural character. There are options available to the city to consider in allowing, and we would add various types and densities of continued rural residential development. City's established policy is allowance of residential development at densities of 1 dwelling unit per 5 acres with minimum requirements for net buildable land imposed as part of the zoning ordinance. Rural development is considered to be all parcels with 1 acre and greater. However, the ability to accommodate primary and secondary septic sites and meet the city's lot buildability requirements typically necessitates larger lots. Okay, with that addition of that last line there, rural development is considered to be all parcels 1 acre and greater. Didn't we at one point say to be able to accommodate the septic backup in a well, it was at least 1 acre and a quarter?
Yeah, our ordinance requires 1 full upland acre and then 23,000 square feet of separation. But yes, you're right in quoting the city engineer has always said 1.25 to 1.5 is better. And, the problem we've had in the past, with some lots only having an acre or a little better of upland is that the developers and/or possibly the township at the time didn't consider what portion of that acre was setback and unusable to the residents. So we run into situations now where, you know, you don't have much, if any, backyard, you're butted right up to a wetland, and your usable area is so limited, it forces people to come in for variances and that kind of thing for accessory structures. So I just wanna kinda head that off at the pass and think about that a little more, possibly gross, lot area versus a net lot area, and only allowing a certain portion of each lot to be wetland. Again, that is an ordinance, you know, standard that we can talk about later.
So that's an ordinance standard, so here where we actually are specific, talk to developments considered to be all parcels 1 acre and greater.
That is based on Met Council's descriptions for rural residential. That is just a generally known fact regarding lot size, whether you're rural, suburban, you know, urban, that kind of thing.
So with that being their general description, what I anticipate is, I'm gonna keep promoting this, this is the driving factor to, this is our primary document that guides our ordinances, our zoning regulations, our policies.
Right,
If somebody comes back here and says, well, I see right there, it says 1 acre. Because technically that meets the Met Council description of rural residential. Do we want to, if we're gonna put 1 acre in this document as opposed to our ordinances, and we come back with an ordinance that says, we're gonna require 1.25 acre, 1.5 acre upland on your 5 acre average, and they're gonna come back and say, here, 1 acre. Is that going to cause us problems? Or potentially, can we minimize it by not putting that number here?
yeah, we don't have to refer to the size of the lot in this document necessarily, so,
Maybe I'm just still smarting from last fall's Facebook, but.
and that's fine. I have no problem with eliminating it if we just stick with the rural residential, that all of our lots are rural residential. That's fine.
I just think that's safer, because then we come in with an ordinance, somebody doesn't come back and counter us with, well, gee, your comp plan is smaller than your ordinance.
Mr. Mayor.
Councilmember Bryant.
The important part there, I would say, correct me if I'm wrong, Planner Stockman, is the ability to accommodate primary septic and secondary septic sites and the
Exactly.
buildability requirements.
Exactly.
So if you took out the first half of that sentence and left and tweaked it slightly to basically focus on the septic and the buildability, then that would basically get the intent of what we're trying to get across.
Yes, I would be fine with that. Does that sound okay to everybody else?
Yep.
Okay, thanks.
So you can even keep that first part, rural development is considered to be the ability to accommodate primary and secondary septic sites and meet the city's lot buildability requirements, which we'll define in the ordinances. Correct?
Yeah, that sounds good.
All right, next paragraph, city will continue to evaluate various options for defining and controlling residential growth. Cities considered options in the past. And I want it understood here, this is existing verbiage.
Right.
The city has considered options in the past for allowing residential cluster development to provide for preservation of permanent open space and alternative land use patterns. And then we go into the settlement agreement in the southeast part of the city.
And if I could, Mr. Mayor, make a note that there were graphics in the 2030 plan that showed some options for cluster development. So if you want, we can leave those in.
I'll give a quarter to anybody who can come up with a synonym for cluster.
Right.
It's worth money to you.
Well,
Joel?
it's basically open space preservation.
Yes,
I would say.
and so can we change it to that?
Sure.
Just because that's been such a, and I know that, you know, we've taken heat because it means the same thing, but it doesn't mean the same thing. There's such a negative connotation to the one word, and the other one's more accurate. We're trying to preserve the open space.
Mr. Mayor,
Councilmember Bryan.
the city has considered options in the past to provide for preservation of permanent open space and an alternative land use pattern.
Yep.
Sure.
Which is accurate. You know, we had a really nice plan going there.
It's not worth a quarter though.
Well, that's because I came up with it.
Mr. Mayor,
I'm giving myself a quarter. Councilmember Greenberg.
array, assemblage, band, batch, bunch, bundle, chunk, clump, collection.
It's not a quarter apiece, though.
Mob, body, clutch, cover, crew, gathering.
Very literal.
I would have expected that of Dan.
I don't have internet. Oh, he does.
It's not a quarter apiece, though.
Did you say we have to select it to get the, like the reward
Yeah.
is only valid with conviction?
All right, anything else on page 8? Page 9 is the rest of the settlement area there.
Mr. Mayor,
Councilmember Bryan?
with the added part on 9, are we seriously focusing on, over the next 10 years, a city center or central business district?
That is the question to us. You know, I was looking through some of the old planning documents I had from previous meetings like this, and they really do say that, you know, you've got to think, you know, 20, 25 years down the road.
Yeah.
What does this become here? And I grew up in Crystal, and I never knew where downtown was. Had a shopping center with some strip malls that was where you always went to, but the city hall was completely somewhere else in town, and I just never felt like there's so many suburban areas that haven't had an identifiable downtown. And so one of the things we've talked about over the years when we did the road plans here for the major intersections is what would this look like if we were to develop, say, this park and the city's adjacent land into a central business district of some sort. So you had a identity because this is where the city hall is, this is where city offices are, and we could have a downtown, much as we refer to this as downtown now then, just to get a laugh sometimes, but to consider if we were to develop new parkland, what would this area be if we were to take it as a central downtown? So that is a concept that Liz is proposing here that we've talked about in the past. What would that look like if we wanted to do that?
Mr. Mayor.
He's still thinking.
Oh,
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
Planner
I
Stratton.
would agree with your notion that planning takes many, many years and would not argue that if you developed a concept plan today, it's gonna change 10 times by the time anything happens. But it puts the idea out there for what your long-term intent is, and it helps move it along, especially, helps to have it in your comp plan, especially if you get a developer or the opportunity somewhere to redevelop. But it's just a thought.
And I'm not denying the thought, I'm just going, will it be the focus over the next 10 years? Or are we just, I mean, that's not really the core of what we're gonna be working on, we're not focusing in on it.
But
Oh,
considered,
you're talking about the verbiage here right now.
Is it, I mean, I would say considered over focus per se, but I mean, it's not like,
I think it's more accurate.
it's not like that is, you know, on our top list of things to go through to begin the process of.
Have you
in the
seen
next
her
5
list?
years. No, I haven't.
You're saying it's not on the council's.
It's not on the council's list, if we're making a list, I mean,
So it's under commercial development. We can certainly remove focus. I understand that your hang up, so to speak, on the word. Maybe we investigate, we look into, we
Considered. Considered.
chat about it.
no, I'm just, I could totally see if things were, you know, if you looked back 10, 15 years ago, you could easily have reformulated things and it would look totally different up here.
Well, I think that one of the things is, you know, as Planner Stockman says, this will change. But since we've become a city, we've considered the pole building over here as a community center and offices. We've considered what's now the bootleggers as city hall, community center, you know, activity center. When we were a township, they had all of this city land here laid out with a senior center and a rec center and a new city hall and stuff. So I think it certainly makes sense to have a concept plan in there. While we're not pursuing it at this point, as Planner Stockman says, if somebody came along with an idea, we'd say, here's our general concept. And if you facilitate this, we could expedite the time frame. But at least we'd have some plan rather than be caught off guard and have somebody come in and develop beyond what we would want. So I think having the general idea of a town center would be good to think about now and then be ready should somebody or some occasion show up, you know, this building we decide to deteriorate and we have to do something else, where would we go with the new building? And I will tell you that on a similar vein, years ago when we had this discussion about bridge money, we have one bridge considered in town, it's a big culvert over in Fort Brook. And we had this big debate over, it's a multi-year deal before you can get government money to help you out with this. Why are we wasting our time on it now? And we, as a council, decided we would just be prepared. If money ever showed up, we're ready to go. And the state showed up with extra money that year. It wasn't a bonding year, and they had extra money and said, anybody who's ready can apply for this money. And we partnership with the county, and we were the first ones in, and they said, we're 5-6 years out, don't worry about it. And we got it immediately, got good funds on it, and the bridge got replaced. So it pays to be ready, even if you're not immediately moving forward. So I think it's a good idea that we consider it and be ready for it.
Mr. Mayor,
Councilmember Greenberg.
could we rephrase it to be part of our vision? Instead of be our focus, to part of our vision? Instead of just being considered, it's part of our vision, but we're not focusing on it like a laser. What do you think, Dan?
That's fine.
I like that.
I agree that focus is not accurate.
That's all I want, that's my point. However we want to tweak it, that's fine.
Will be part of our vision.
Got it.
Okay.
And Mr. Mayor,
Page 10.
Yes,
we can call it whatever we want. We could call it a bubble diagram. We could call it a detailed land use plan. It doesn't have to be parking stalls and building layouts, you know, it can just be uses, sort of a use diagram as to how it might. So whatever we decide is fine.
Okay.
Mr. Mayor,
Councilmember Rainville.
would then that be one of the items that we would put on the tickle file to
Yes.
talk about later?
Yes.
Yep.
Who's keeping the tickle file?
She's the tickle.
I just want,
Okay.
Page 10. We added a bullet point there to design construction standards.
well, I guess that was there, that's probably just that part was in there. We added the street connections and the elimination of dead ends.
Anybody got a question on street connections section? I mean, this is consistent with what we're currently doing in our ordinances.
Correct.
All right, anything else on that one? Assessment policies, another question.
Mr. Mayor?
Councilmember Rainville.
I think that would just, could be removed and it would be on our tickle file. The change, that underlined blue.
So yeah, not included in here, but put it part of the
Right.
tickle file.
Okay. So let me just clarify then, the last sentence where the city should also continue to require that new development pay all costs, that was in there,
That would stay.
so should we leave that in?
Why is it highlighted in yellow?
Well, just because there's been some, well, there was some recent talk about construction of new streets and upgrades of existing streets. When you're talking about a new development, so the upgrade of existing streets gets a little touchy. So depending on if you're constructing a brand new street, well, this is, really ordinance talking here, but, a new street, on both sides fronting with new lots, then obviously that's the requirement of the developer to build. When you have lots being subdivided on existing streets, then that's a whole nother issue. If you have a local street that's gravel, do you require the developer to upgrade those streets? And that was the whole issue over on the west side where the sod fields are. When the Frickies came up with the concept many years ago and never did it. But anyway, so this was in here, and I believe it is how our current ordinance reads, but we can address that later. I will put street construction assessment policies as a tickle item.
And just so you know, so the yellow highlight was in the existing document. So
Okay.
that has been our practice. It's a little hard to enforce. Because that's where you start getting the accusation that we're not development friendly. Sod Farm was an example of that, because it, in their estimation, would have cost $1 million to blacktop the road out to now then Boulevard.
Wow.
But they were looking at putting in a significant number of homes there, and they would go onto a gravel road, onto a gravel road. And so the township at the time said, no, you have to pave out, policies you pave out to the blacktop. And so it stifled that development. All right, page 11.
Mr. Mayor, could I have a
Yes, sir.
mention something? Is this, on this commercial plan, has that been, people agreed with this as part on the sheet? Am I just wasting my time sitting here?
No,
Because, have they all agreed that Moritz and has agreed to have commercial property on this side?
Moritz has, yes.
yes.
Moritz?
Moritz showed up at our January meeting, yes.
No, I didn't know about the January meeting because we weren't here.
Oh,
No one
okay.
notified us. We didn't get a letter or anything. So, and it's possible, I got 15 acres there right along the highway. It's ideal for commercial, as everybody can see as they go by.
Right.
It's up in highland and ready to go. But because the Muellers don't want any of their land used commercially or on commercial, then ours is eliminated. Is that possible that we could go commercial and still have Muellers not being commercial? I gotta find that out, otherwise I'm just wasting my time here.
Liz, we had discussed that it needed to be contiguous.
It has to be continuous.
It has to,
Okay, well, that's what I wanted to know. I'm just wasting my time here.
but let me clarify something, because at the last meeting, I searched the zoning ordinance and there was no definition of contiguous. But since then, I have found a definition of contiguous in our subdivision ordinance. And in fact, I printed it here. The definition of contiguous contained within the city's subdivision ordinance is all land within a subdivision that cannot be separated by anything except local, collector, or arterial street. So we are considering, according to the current definition, it could be contiguous. So if we go back to the land use plan that Mr. McCray is holding, he technically would be across the street here from Moritz and Landrew and these other landowners. That could be considered contiguous under our current definition,
Because it's separated by a road.
because it's only separated by a road and nothing else, right? Not another zoning.
That's our
district.
definition?
Yeah.
Are you saying, sir, that you would like to be zoned commercial?
Well, we wanted to be commercial before, when we was commercial for a while, till they petitioned and got us off. And now, because Mueller doesn't wanna be in that, then we sat there with 15 acres, that'd be ideal commercially. And we'll sell the private farm, I suppose, that's because we're eliminated. And we wanted to go commercial, but now Mark didn't wanna go commercial before. He got a lawyer and everything to fight it. Now you say he's agreed to it. So. And it's right across the road from us.
Right.
Yeah, things change, that just goes to show you, right? But yeah, I mean, you're correct, we had the two landowners that are adjacent to you that were opposed,
Now,
and
see,
they,
the 15 acres doesn't include Pahutka's land.
right,
Whether he's opposed or not, that's swampland back there. It's lowland. So, but we got high and dry land that could be used. So, anyway, that's what if there's nothing that can be done, I'm just wasting my time.
What are you saying, Liz? Are you telling him that he can be commercial, or he can't?
yeah, he could be under that definition because he's contiguous then.
You see, hear that, Benny? She's saying you could be commercial.
It could become commercial.
That's what she's saying.
So I could actually sell it to somebody that wants to build something commercial there.
Yes, after the comprehensive plan is officially adopted, yes. So as part of this, we adopt the comp plan and then we have to change our zoning map to show that we've rezoned it. So it wouldn't necessarily be immediate, but, if the council agrees to that, I would go along with that for sure. I don't have a problem with that. I would actually prefer to see both sides of 22 commercial. I think it would be better. And one reason I say that is because of our frontage road plan that we approved in 2013. And this is a future road that comes out of our industrial area, this being 22. This is the nursery here, and then the new storage facility. And, you know, the next full intersection has to be further west, and this is right on the edge of Mr. McCray here. So putting in a stub street here and then allowing this to be developed commercially does make some sense.
Mr. Mayor, is that something we could determine right now? Or would it, be done in planning and zoning? It's part of the comp plan, could
Or
we
the
make
comp
that?
plan. My recommendation is that we talk to the Muellers like we talked about. I would rather see the contiguous actually be contiguous, not knowing that that other definition existed. The problem with that definition is, we've got other people who have tried to use that and use it in a way that's not conducive to what the city would like to do. People that want to take smaller parcels and put in smaller lots and just say, oh, I've got some land across the road, I'll just make that part of this development. So I think it opens us up to much looser land use. I think it'd be better off if we could talk with Gary and see if he's okay with the land just bordering 22 being commercial. He doesn't have to develop, doesn't have to do anything with it, but then it allows the McCray property to become commercial in a true contiguous, and then we take that, the more generous definition out of the picture, because that, I think that's gonna have a lot more negative impact on us to keep that definition in there.
Well, the answer then, Denny, is we'd want to get, we'd want to get, we'd want to get Muellers involved and get them to commit to a commercial.
Then I'm wasting my time, because Mueller's, they're fighting against it. Until she got their swampland, you wouldn't use it for commercial anyway, she killed it all.
Yeah, so we're gonna talk with Gary and Kim.
So, anyway, that's why, I guess I don't need to, unless, because we're a short timer, so it's gonna be, sold as a farm or commercially. We had people that was interested commercially, but we're not. So, and I was hoping that when this come up again, we would be put on commercial.
Don, according to the mayor, he's going, or someone, is gonna try to talk to the Muellers, and maybe they have a different mindset if they understood all of it.
We went through that again, and they got petitions to take us off before, because they didn't want to be commercial, because the taxes was gonna go up, and nobody explained them that, taxes don't go up unless you make it commercial.
That's
or use it
why they need to
That's why
have
we're gonna have
someone
the
talk to them.
explanation.
So anyway, I've talked to Muellers before, and Kim has got that 80 acres that she's not doing anything, but
Yeah.
it's, you know, they put in crops, or now they haven't got the crops all taken out yet
Yeah.
from last year, so. Anyway, that's what I'm here for, and I guess we'll just go ahead and,
So if we come up with a resolution, we'll make sure you're contacted.
I'll make sure I know about it, because we're not out here at meetings every day, other times, so we didn't know about the January meeting, we never got any information on it.
I have your address now, though. I didn't have your address before, because your mail was forwarded and it didn't get there in time, so now I have your address.
Your wife
We
called,
didn't get the
remember?
letter, was it forwarded, if it went to our old address, it should have been forwarded,
Right, it didn't get there in time.
you know, so.
That's right, it came
Anyway.
late, that was the
Right.
deal, yeah. Mr.
So,
Mayor?
thanks.
We're
Thanks,
glad
Don.
you came, Don, and
Don.
don't be discouraged, because who knows what happens.
It'll work out.
Yes.
Mr. McCray, yeah, I would commend you for attending, because
Yes.
your voice, your comments are on the record.
Yeah.
But just one question before you go, when you had your property on the market before, I had several calls for people that wanted to develop it and split it residentially. Do you know what happened to those folks?
I know what happened to it, yeah. They had some false information from City Hall.
About,
I called them and fixed it, though.
Yeah, we got
I
that
personally
fixed.
called them and fixed it.
We
oh,
got
about
that
3
fixed
lots you
later
mean?
after, but they had people from before that they had want, and then they went to City Hall and they said, well, didn't have 15 acres. So, but that was false, they didn't know what they was talking about. Well, I only pay taxes on 12.6
Right.
because the county are at 52 feet off in our land. And I didn't want it to sell. Mark didn't sell any land on his side
Yeah,
for the county, for the easement. So they took the 52 feet after they come up with the
right.
original price, and then they agreed to Green Acres, because I no longer qualified without 10 acres of wood kind.
Mhm.
So county give me, they drafted a deal where I could have Green Acres, and I didn't have to pay taxes on that ditch they took,
Right.
because it's all weeds.
Well, keep that to yourself, because everybody's gonna wanna know that info.
No, that's how they do it.
Well,
They-
that's
Everybody's got
That's why
two
it hasn't
numbers.
sold
Okay.
already, really.
Oh, okay.
Because we had people that were chomping at the bit to get it. But they came to City Hall and they give the wrong
Okay,
info.
but you
Right,
gotta
that's-
forgive me, Don, I was new and I took care of it.
That's not, yeah, it's not
Okay,
100%
but that's-
accurate, yeah.
That's history now.
Yeah,
Anyway,
under the bridge.
yeah.
Okay, thanks,
Thanks.
Don.
Thanks, Don.
Good on.
Thank you, Don.
Thanks for coming.
Drive safely.
Liz, you were starting to ask something?
Pardon me?
You were starting to ask something?
Oh, that's the question I wanted to ask him, because I had at least 3 calls, interested in it residentially, and 1 or 2 interested in it commercially. So, a lot of people did call at first, and then I'm not sure if he had taken it off the market for a while.
He did,
Yeah, and
because his
then,
wife got upset and wanted to move back home.
right,
Actually, he was just saying tonight that
Oh, sorry, sorry.
all the services there where they're at, they're kind of getting tired of being indoors, and he's looking at seed catalogs, and so he may be
Let's
coming back.
not-
so.
Let's stay on task.
okay,
But to the point, I think, for the particular file, I think it'd be cleaner if we go back to our original concept of contiguous and work with the Muellers.
well, but may I comment about that? I mean, look at our industrial park here in this picture. I mean, contiguous, you almost have to include streets if you're thinking contiguous, because look at the industrial park. You know, everything is separated by streets, so I think you
Not
have
by
to,
arterials,
not by arterials.
yeah.
Well, okay, I guess, yeah, we can definitely look at what other cities do and their definitions and how they treat that, so we'll add that to my
Just
list.
thinking of challenge we had this last year, planning and zoning.
Yeah. I know exactly what you're talking about.
And and question we'll have over on the east side.
In a little while here, yeah. Okay,
You know,
so,
the understanding most people have had a contiguous,
immediately, if you go by the Webster definition, it's immediately adjacent or touching, yeah.
and the zone that we have that has the streets going through it, I mean, that was all zoned and then the streets were put in it,
Which is, right, exactly, yeah.
which is different than existing streets that, especially when they're major or minor arterials.
But the important thing to remember is that you're contiguous to a like or compatible district, not necessarily, exactly the same, but anyway, okay, well, we can,
So put that one in the ticket.
Mr.
got
Mayor.
it.
That's my Greenberg.
Liz, if someone were to sell that exact property we were discussing about for residential versus commercial, right now, would the benefit, would the cost be the same? Would you get the same price? Or would there be an incentive for us